Massive stone circles predate the pyramids by thousands of years. This is the world's first monumental architecture, built by societies we once considered primitive. By the end of this video, you will understand the revolutionary engineering logic that made these ancient wonders possible. How did people without writing or metal tools coordinate to erect structures meant to last forever? And why did they bury their greatest creations? This story reveals a hidden chapter of human intellect, one that reshapes our entire understanding of early civilization. What does true innovation look like when stripped of all modern technology? A communal fire crackles not for warmth or cooking, but as a central point for a different kind of sustenance. Around it, a society is making a conscious choice, a declaration carved not in words but in earth and stone. This is the birth of an idea, a shared vision to create something that will outlive every single person present. This is the heart of monumental architecture. It is a physical testament to a community's ability to look beyond the immediate needs of food and shelter, to invest its energy in a legacy. The scale of such a project demands organized labor, pulling people away from their daily tasks for a goal that serves the collective identity. The materials chosen are not wood or thatch, which decay, but stone and earth, substances meant to defy time itself, and the function is never purely practical. A simple house keeps the rain out, but a vast stone circle, precisely aligned with the sun or moon, weaves the cosmos into the very fabric of daily life. It transforms the landscape into a calendar, a temple, a symbol of a people's place in the universe. This shift from building for necessity to engineering for meaning represents one of humanity's most profound cognitive leaps. How does a group of people first conceive of a project that they themselves will never see finished? The answer lies in a new kind of logic, a social and engineering calculus that allowed our ancestors to attempt the impossible. Roughly 12,000 years ago, a quiet revolution began to reshape the human story. This was the Pre-Pottery Neolithic era, a time when roaming bands of hunter-gatherers started to settle down. They began to cultivate wild grains and manage herds of animals, trading a life of constant movement for one of permanent villages. This shift created something humanity had never known before, a stable surplus. For the first time, communities produced more food than they needed for immediate survival, freeing up time and labor. More importantly, it forged a new kind of social fabric, one woven from shared territory and a collective future. Archaeologists like Ian Hodder suggest this revolution was not merely an economic change, it was a revolution of the mind. Settled life fostered new ideas about ownership, ancestry, and belonging. It allowed for the emergence of social roles beyond hunter or gatherer, creating leaders who could coordinate and visionaries who could plan for generations they would never meet. This was the fertile ground, both literal and symbolic, where the seeds of monumental architecture were sown. Why would a community, still living in simple round houses, choose to invest immense effort into building something with no obvious practical use? The answer lies in a new form of value, what we might call social and symbolic capital. A great structure became a physical anchor for a community's identity, a testament to their shared beliefs and their collective power. It was a declaration that they were no longer just surviving, they were building a legacy. This profound shift in human ambition leads us directly to a specific, breathtaking site, a place that shattered our assumptions about what these early societies could achieve. Göbekli Tepe rises from a Turkish hilltop like a question carved in stone. Its T-shaped pillars, some weighing over 10 tons, stand in silent circles that predate Stonehenge by 6,000 years. This is not the work of a settled farming society, but of hunter-gatherers. They built this complex at a time when humanity was still supposed to be nomadic, still searching for its next meal. The discovery of Göbekli Tepe by archaeologist Klaus Schmidt did not just add a new site to the map, it fundamentally rewrote the story of civilization. For decades, the established logic was clear. First, humans invented agriculture, which created food surplus. This surplus allowed for specialization, social hierarchy, and finally, the spare time and labor to build monuments. Göbekli Tepe turns that sequence completely upside down. Here, the monument appears to have come first. The intricate carvings of foxes, boars, and cranes on the pillars speak of a sophisticated symbolic world, a spiritual focus that may have been the very catalyst that brought people together and inspired them to settle down and farm. The engineering logic on display is breathtaking. These people used stone tools to quarry, shape, and transport massive limestone blocks from nearby pits. How did they move a multi-ton pillar hundreds of meters and then stand it upright in a precisely dug socket? The answer lies in a form of proto-engineering, a collective intelligence that understood leverage, ramp construction, and the power of coordinated labor. There was no pharaoh commanding this work, no written plan to follow. This was a communal project, a shared vision realized through oral tradition, and a deep, practical understanding of materials and teamwork. Göbekli Tepe stands as a powerful testament to a forgotten truth. Monumental architecture was not a product of complex society. It may very well have been the tool that created it. The sheer scale of these ancient projects points to a fundamental truth. The real engineering marvel was not just moving stone, but mobilizing people. Envision hundreds of individuals, perhaps from different clans, their hands gripping ropes made of plant fiber, their voices rising in a unified chant as they drag a 10-ton pillar across the landscape. This was not the work of slaves under a whip, but of a community united by a shared vision. In societies without kings or written laws, this required a powerful social logic. Leadership was likely persuasive, rooted in respect and spiritual authority. The incentive to contribute may have been woven into the very fabric of belief, turning back breaking labor into a sacred act, a necessary contribution to a cosmic order. Anthropological studies of similar communal projects reveal a fascinating dynamic. This kind of collective work does not just build monuments, it builds society itself. It forges stronger bonds, creates a shared identity, and turns a collection of individuals into a cohesive whole with a common purpose. The logic here is deeply practical. Work was organized around the seasons, scheduled for times when hunting or gathering pressures were low. A sophisticated division of labor would have naturally emerged. Some individuals possessing unique skill would have focused on quarrying the perfect limestone blocks. Others, with an artist's touch, would have carved the intricate animal reliefs. And many, many more would have been dedicated to the immense task of transport and placement. At a place like Göbekli Tepe, the construction effort itself was probably a periodic gathering, a grand event that combined ritual, feasting, and work. The act of building was inseparable from the purpose of the structure. This transforms our understanding of the labor from a simple chore to a profound cultural practice. It reveals something essential about human nature, our innate drive to create together, to pool our efforts for a legacy that outlives us all. This social engine was the indispensable foundation, the living machinery that made the impossible seem achievable. But once you have the people, you then face the raw, physical challenge of the material itself. These builders became one with the stone beneath their feet. Without the option to import exotic materials, they turned their local landscape into a vast, open-air toolkit. developing an intimate, almost instinctual understanding of geology. Picture a craftsperson running their hands over a limestone outcrop, searching for the hidden language of the rock. They were reading natural fissures and bedding planes, looking for weaknesses that could become opportunities. Their methods were brilliantly simple, yet required profound knowledge. They might light a controlled fire against the stone face, heating it intensely, and then suddenly douse it with water. This thermal shock, the rapid expansion and contraction, would cause the rock to crack precisely along its natural grain. Alternatively, they would use harder stones like flint or dolomite to pound along a chosen line, patiently pecking away until a perfect block split free. This was not random hacking. It was a form of surgical precision achieved with Neolithic tools. As engineer J. Romilly Allen noted, ancient builders possessed a genius for economy. They selected stones that were naturally flat or easily shaped, minimizing the labor of working them. They understood which rock layers were most resistant to weathering, ensuring their structures would endure. At sites like Navali Sori, a close cousin to Göbekli Tepe, we see this mastery in action. Using locally abundant limestone and simple flint chisels, they carved massive pillars adorned with intricate reliefs. This was an empirical science, a body of knowledge built through generations of hands-on experimentation. How did this trial and error lead to standardized methods? Over time, successful techniques became tradition. The most efficient way to quarry a block, the ideal shape for a stable foundation, the perfect angle for a carving tool, all of this hard-won knowledge was passed down orally, becoming the standardized toolkit for an entire culture. This deep material mastery was one half of a powerful equation. The other half required a hidden language of shape and space, a primitive yet effective form of mathematics that gave their vision structure and symmetry. A simple rope and a central stake became the world's first drafting tool. This elegant method allowed builders to inscribe a perfect circle onto the earth, guaranteeing that every massive pillar in an enclosure would be precisely equidistant from the center. This was intuitive geometry in its purest form, a practical, repeatable technique that produced mathematically consistent results without a single written equation. They were using the fundamental principles of what we now call geometry, not as an abstract science, but as a hands-on language of construction. Experts like John Anthony West have observed that many of these ancient structures unconsciously embed sophisticated geometric ratios, patterns that resonate with proportions found throughout the natural world. These ratios, such as the golden ratio, may have been derived from observing the human body, the growth patterns of plants, or the cycles of the cosmos itself. The logic was likely both aesthetic and deeply symbolic, creating a harmony between the built structure and the universal order it sought to represent. This spatial genius extended to the creation of the first standardized units of measurement. A builder's own forearm, from elbow to fingertip, could become a reliable cubit, a personal ruler that ensured consistency across a project spanning generations. This use of the human body as a scale transformed individual effort into a collective, coordinated enterprise. But the most profound application of this spatial planning was its connection to the sky. The layout of enclosures at sites like Göbekli Tepe appears to reflect precise alignments with the sun, moon, and stars. This was not merely a technical feat, it was a cosmological act. By orienting a stone circle to the solstice sunrise or a specific constellation, the builders were weaving time and the heavens into the very fabric of their monument. The structure became a giant calendar, a cosmic clock that governed rituals and agricultural cycles. So why did these geometric principles become the universal language of early monuments? They provided a reliable, transferable framework that could be understood and executed by anyone, regardless of their individual skill level. This shared visual and spatial logic ensured that a project started by one generation could be continued by the next with perfect coherence. It was the indispensable blueprint for immortality, etched not on parchment but in the collective memory of a culture. Yet this brilliant spatial plan would have remained just a drawing in the dirt without the final, physical act of bringing the stone to the site. Moving a 10-ton pillar from quarry to construction site was a slow, rhythmic dance of physics and human will. Without wheels or domesticated animals, the builders relied on a deep, intuitive understanding of simple machines. The lever was their first tool, a strong wooden pole that could lift one end of a massive stone just enough to slide a log roller underneath. These logs, laid in a continuous track, transformed sliding friction into the far easier rolling friction. A team of people pulling on ropes made of twisted plant fibers could then coax the immense weight forward, with others constantly moving the rear rollers to the front in an endless, crawling cycle. To make the path even smoother, they might pour water ahead of the sledge, creating a slick surface of mud that drastically reduced the effort required. This was the practical application of the inclined plane, using a gently sloping earthen ramp to walk a stone up to its final resting place, one patient inch at a time. Experimental archaeologists like Mark Whitby have proven that with these methods and enough coordinated people, moving multi-ton stones was not only possible, but could be achieved with a kind of rhythmic, communal spirit. The process itself was likely a social event, accompanied by chanting, drumming, and shared meals, turning back-breaking labor into a collective celebration. The logistics behind this operation reveal a sophisticated mind. Pathways had to be surveyed and cleared in advance, removing obstacles and ensuring the most efficient route from quarry to temple. At a site like Göbekli Tepe, the journey for each pillar, though only a few hundred meters, was a monumental undertaking. The ground would have been prepared and temporary rest stops built to allow the teams to recover. The final approach to the construction pit would have involved a specially built ramp, allowing the pillar to be dragged to the very edge of the socket prepared for it. What does this tell us about human problem solving? It demonstrates a breathtaking perseverance, a willingness to break an impossible task down into thousands of small, manageable steps, each one achievable with the tools and knowledge at hand. This logistical genius, however, was only half the battle. Once the stone arrived at its destination, the most delicate and dangerous operation began, the act of standing it upright. The final and most critical act was to make the stone stand forever. After the immense effort of moving a pillar, the moment of raising it was a delicate ballet of physics and intuition. Builders would have excavated a foundation pit, its depth carefully calculated to anchor the massive weight. They would then pack the bottom with layers of crushed stone and carefully selected soil, creating a stable, well-draining base that would resist settling for millennia. This was an empirical science of soil mechanics, knowledge gained through generations of observing how Earth behaves under pressure. The pillar was then carefully guided, perhaps with a complex arrangement of ropes and levers, to tilt precariously over the socket before being pulled upright into its permanent home. The sound of stone meeting packed earth at the bottom of that socket must have been a profound moment of completion, a silent promise of endurance. This logic of stability extended to the very shapes they chose. The T-shaped pillars at Göbekli Tepe are a masterclass in this principle. Their wide, flat tops act as a natural counterbalance, lowering the center of gravity and making the entire structure incredibly resistant to tipping. More importantly, their bases were not just placed in holes, they were set into sockets meticulously carved directly into the living bedrock. This created a rigid, monolithic connection with the earth itself, a bond that has allowed these pillars to withstand earthquakes for over 12,000 years. This was structural engineering in its most ancient and brilliant form. Without mortar or metal clamps, they relied on gravity, geometry, and a deep understanding of load distribution. Stones were often shaped to interlock, their weight mutually supporting one another in a stable embrace. This dry stone walling technique created structures that could flex and settle without collapsing. How did these builders anticipate stresses they could not possibly model? Their laboratory was the world around them. They observed how natural stone formations weathered storms and tremors. They noticed which slopes were stable and which crumbled. This long-term observational wisdom was combined with a symbolic need for the structure to mirror cosmic permanence. A slight inward inclination in a wall was not just a defense against leaning. It might also have represented a connection between the earth and the heavens. The foundation was more than a physical base. It was a conceptual root, anchoring their community's legacy to the eternal cycles of the world and the sky. The monument's resilience was a direct reflection of their belief in its enduring purpose. This profound understanding of stability, however, leads to one of the most puzzling acts in human history. After investing such staggering effort into building for eternity, these early societies deliberately and carefully buried their greatest achievements. The sky itself was their ultimate blueprint. A monument aligned with the cosmos did more than mark a date. It wove human time into the fabric of the universe. Picture a community gathering in the pre-dawn chill, their breath misting in the air as they face a ring of massive T-shaped pillars. As the first sliver of the sun breaks the horizon, its light pours perfectly through a specific gap in the stones, striking a central marker. In that brilliant moment, the structure transforms from silent stone into a living clock, its alignment affirming a cosmic order and their sacred place within it. This was not mere stargazing, it was a profound integration of engineering and astronomy, a discipline we now call Archaeoastronomy. The builders were not just stacking rocks, they were building a permanent, predictable connection to the heavens. Researchers like Giulio Magli propose that sites such as Göbekli Tepe may contain alignments pointing toward significant stars, including the bright star Sirius. These precise orientations required a deep, generational knowledge of the night sky, an oral tradition that tracked the slow dance of constellations over centuries. How did they translate this celestial knowledge into stone with such accuracy? Their methods were brilliantly practical. A simple wooden pole, or a series of them, could be used as a sighting device over long distances. By observing where the sun rose or set on the horizon over an entire year, they could identify the extreme points of the solstices. They might also use shadows cast by a central post, marking the length and direction of its shadow at different times to pinpoint key solar events. This empirical data was then permanently etched into the landscape with massive stones, creating a calendar that would never need resetting. This celestial dimension served a powerful dual purpose. Symbolically, it rooted the community's identity and spiritual beliefs in the eternal, unchanging cycles above. Practically, it provided an indispensable agricultural and ritual timetable, signaling when to plant, when to harvest, and when to hold the most important ceremonies. The cosmic alignment made the monument a central, authoritative source of truth for the entire society. Why did this practice become so universal? From the stone circles of Britain to the earliest temples of Malta, we see the same logic applied. Linking architecture to the sky granted these structures a layer of meaning that transcended any single generation. It made them not just buildings, but permanent participants in a cosmic conversation. ensuring their relevance as long as the sun continued to rise and the stars continued to turn. This deep connection to the heavens underscores the intellectual sophistication of these early engineers, but it makes their final, most mysterious act even more perplexing. Why, after achieving such a perfect union of earth and sky, would a society deliberately choose to bury its greatest creation? A network of similar sites stretches across the ancient landscape, from the Turkish highlands to the Syrian plains. Göbekli Tepe was not a lone, miraculous anomaly, but perhaps the most spectacular expression of a widespread cultural movement. At Jerf El Omar in Syria, archaeologists uncovered a settlement with communal structures that echo the same basic blueprint, featuring T-shaped pillars and ritual spaces designed for gatherings. Further east, at Bonkuklu Tala in Turkey, we find an even earlier village, one that also experimented with aligned stone structures and symbolic carvings, suggesting a long, gradual process of development. This pattern reveals a powerful truth. The engineering logic behind these monuments was not an isolated spark of genius, but a shared cognitive toolkit spreading across the Fertile Crescent. How did these ideas travel across such vast distances in a world without writing? They likely moved with people, carried along trade routes and migration paths as communities exchanged not only goods like obsidian for tools, but also the far more valuable currency of knowledge and belief. Archaeologist Daniel Stordor's work emphasizes this connected world, noting that while each site has its own unique character, they are bound by common threads, a shared vocabulary of form and function. The variations themselves are incredibly telling. Some sites are significantly smaller than Göbekli Tepe, their layouts suggesting they might represent earlier, more experimental prototypes. The decorative motifs also shift from place to place. Where Göbekli Tepe showcases fierce predators and soaring birds, a site like Jerf El Omar might feature different animal carvings or geometric patterns, reflecting local spiritual beliefs and the specific creatures that inhabited their environment. This was not a case of simple copying, but of a powerful underlying principle being adapted and reinvented by each community to suit their own world. What does this network of early centers tell us about the spread of innovation? It suggests that the birth of monumental architecture was a collective, conversational process. Different groups were tackling the same fundamental human urge to build something lasting and meaningful, and they were learning from one another's successes and failures. This comparative view transforms our understanding from a single, mysterious wonder to a vibrant, interconnected, and experimenting world. A world we can now begin to reconstruct not just through excavated stones, but through the act of building itself. A team of volunteers gathers around a limestone block, their hands gripping ropes woven from plant fibers and wooden levers hewn from nearby trees. This is not a scene from the distant past, but a modern experiment in the field of experimental archaeology. Researchers and dedicated enthusiasts are attempting to replicate the exact processes used to build sites like Göbekli Tepe, using only the tools and materials available 12,000 years ago. They are not just studying history, they are physically reliving it, and the results are profoundly revealing. The first attempt to move a 5-ton stone is a lesson in pure frustration. The ropes strain, the log rollers slip, and the immense weight seems to defy every effort. But then, a rhythm emerges. Through trial and error, the team discovers the precise angle for the levers, the optimal number of people needed on the ropes, and the exact amount of water to pour to create a slick mud path. What seems like an impossible task at dawn becomes, by afternoon, a coordinated, rhythmic dance. The learning curve is steep, but it is real. With each repetition, the movements become more fluid, the communication more intuitive. A project led by Klaus Schmidt's own team demonstrated that with a group of about 50 individuals, a 5-ton pillar could be quarried, transported hundreds of meters and raised into its socket in a matter of days. This timeline is not a product of myth or supernatural aid, but of human cooperation and accumulated practical wisdom. The social dynamics observed during these experiments are just as telling as the engineering. There is no room for a silent, disconnected workforce. Successful construction demands constant, clear communication, a single voice calling out the rhythm for pulling, a shared understanding of when to push and when to rest. Leadership emerges naturally, not from a title, but from competence and the ability to coordinate the group's energy. These reenactments reveal that the construction process itself was a powerful social glue, forging trust and interdependence through shared, physically demanding labor. What does this hands-on evidence teach us about innovation under constraint? It shows that necessity is not just the mother of invention, but also of refinement and efficiency. The ancient builders did not have superior strength or alien technology. They had persistence and a brilliant capacity to learn from failure, turning each obstacle into a lesson that improved the next attempt. This empirical evidence provides the solid ground we need to move from how they built these structures to the deeper question of why. It sets the stage to explore the final, most symbolic layer of their logic, the meaning they deliberately encoded within the stone for eternity. The carvings on the pillars were never just decoration, they were a complete language written in stone. A fox winding its way around a T-shaped column was not a simple picture of an animal, but a potent symbol, perhaps representing a specific clan or a key character in a foundational myth. Every member of that society would have understood its meaning instantly, reading the pillar not as an inert block, but as a page from their collective storybook. This symbolic dimension reveals the true purpose of the engineering. The entire monumental effort was subservient to a deeper need to express cosmology, mythology, and social values. The placement of animals, from menacing scorpions to soaring cranes, likely served as a visual map of their spiritual world, a world where humans, animals, and spirits were intimately connected. Anthropologists like David Lewis Williams propose that such art in sacred contexts helped mediate between the human and spirit worlds, creating a tangible bridge to the unseen. The very act of gathering to build and then to worship at these carved stones reinforced social cohesion, binding the community together with shared narratives that were literally set in stone. This symbolic system was remarkably consistent across the region. The repetition of certain motifs, like the recurring H-shaped symbols or the specific postures of human-like forms, points to a widespread visual language shared across hundreds of kilometers. This was not a collection of isolated beliefs, but a connected cultural system where meaning traveled alongside trade goods. The layout of the structures themselves was designed for experience. Moving from an outer ring of stones into a progressively smaller, more enclosed inner circle would have been a powerful physical journey, mirroring a spiritual passage from the mundane world into a sacred, concentrated center. In some enclosures, the two central, tallest pillars are often interpreted as representing ancestors or powerful deities, effectively transforming the entire enclosure into a house of the gods, a permanent dwelling for the divine on earth. This profound symbolic need directly dictated engineering choices. Why was a circle 20 meters across and not 10? The required scale was likely determined by the number of people who needed to gather for a ritual, or by the symbolic importance of the celestial bodies it was meant to mirror. The precise orientation of an entrance was not just a builder's whim. It was a theological decision, aligning the gateway with a solstice sunrise to flood the sacred space with transformative light at a specific moment in the cosmic cycle. The logic was not purely technical but deeply cultural, a fusion of physics and faith. This forces us to ask what kind of cognitive shift had to occur for an entire society to not only conceive of such a project, but to encode it with layers of meaning intended to last for countless generations. The very act of planning a temple that would outlive its builders demanded a new kind of thought. It required holding an image in the mind, not of a tool or a shelter, but of an abstract concept made solid, a vision that had to be maintained and communicated across seasons and generations. This was a cognitive workout of unprecedented scale. Scholars like Stephen Mithen suggest these monumental projects were training grounds for the modern mind. To coordinate such an endeavor, individuals had to develop skills in complex mathematics, not as equations on a page, but as an intuitive sense of volume, weight, and geometric proportion. They had to enhance their communication, conveying detailed plans and sequences without a single written word. And they had to cultivate leadership not based on raw power, but on the ability to organize, motivate, and solve novel problems. This was a revolution happening inside the human brain. The symbolic carvings we find on the pillars are a crucial clue in this story. They represent a form of symbolic representation that likely preceded written language. A carved vulture was not just a bird, it was a concept, a story, a piece of a spiritual code. Creating and understanding these symbols strengthened the neural pathways for abstract thinking, allowing ideas to be detached from immediate objects and shared as collective knowledge. Furthermore, the construction process itself was a relentless exercise for the brain's executive functions, coordinating the quarrying, transport, and raising of a multi-ton pillar required immense working memory. Teams had to remember complex sequences of actions, adjust to unexpected obstacles, and maintain their focus on a long-term goal amidst daily hardships. This shifted the very rhythm of human cognition from short-term, reactive thinking, planning only for the next meal or the next season, to long-term, proactive strategizing. They were now thinking in decades, not just days. This cognitive leap did not just result in bigger buildings. It forged the mental toolkit that would eventually give us agriculture, urban planning, and all the hallmarks of civilization. The ability to plan for a future one would never see, to cooperate on a massive scale, and to encode meaning in symbols. These were the true monuments being built, not in stone, but in the human mind itself. This newfound cognitive capacity, however, needed a physical and social container to reach its full potential, a development we witness in the gradual shift from isolated ritual centers to the world's first true urban hubs. A stone circle that began as a seasonal gathering could pull a society toward a new way of life. The constant flow of people to a site like Göbekli Tepe for rituals and construction created a gravitational pull, attracting those who saw opportunity in providing for the builders. What started as a temporary camp for pilgrims and workers slowly solidified into a permanent village, nestled close to the sacred ground. This was the pivotal shift from a ritual center to an urban nucleus, a place where the monument itself engineered the very first inklings of a city. The social impact was immediate and profound. Not every pair of hands was needed in the fields anymore. The sustained demand for labor and resources created new roles. Skilled craft workers could now dedicate themselves entirely to carving stone, weaving ropes, or manufacturing the high-quality flint chisels needed for the intricate work. This was the birth of specialized labor, a fundamental break from the subsistence lifestyle that had defined humanity for millennia. The logic of the monument demanded it. To maintain the construction effort, a reliable food surplus was essential, which in turn incentivized more efficient and organized farming practices nearby. This created a self-reinforcing cycle. The monument spurred settlement, which improved agriculture, which supported more construction, drawing in even more people. Historical models, like those proposed by Jacques Covin, suggest the symbolic power radiating from these centers helped legitimize new forms of authority. The ritual leaders who once organized ceremonies began to take on the roles of chiefs or priests, coordinating not just spiritual life, but also the distribution of resources and labor for the entire growing community. Their authority was woven from both spiritual belief and practical necessity. This new social order is visible in the emerging trade networks. The need for specific resources, like high-quality flint from distant sources or exotic stones for decorative inlays, spurred connections across vast regions. A village supporting a major monument was no longer an isolated point. It became a node in a wide web of exchange, knitting together different groups and fostering a flow of ideas alongside materials. How did the engineering of monuments inadvertently engineer society itself? The answer lies in the unavoidable demands of collective, long-term projects. They required administration, they required specialization, and they required a social hierarchy capable of making decisions for hundreds and eventually thousands of people. The stones did not just create a temple, they created the blueprint for civilization. This profound transformation, however, makes the final fate of these sites all the more mysterious. Why would a society, after building such a powerful engine for its own growth, eventually choose to walk away? Around 8000 BC, a profound and deliberate silence fell over places like Göbekli Tepe. The vibrant centers of communal labor and celestial ceremony were not left to crumble. They were carefully and methodically buried by the very people who had built them. Vast quantities of soil, stone tools, and animal bones were brought in to fill the majestic stone circles, creating an artificial hill that sealed these temples away for millennia. This was not an act of destruction or disrespect, but one of ritual closure, as if the community was preserving a sacred chapter for a future they knew would be different. The question of why they did this remains one of archaeology's most compelling puzzles. What forces could compel a society to inter its greatest spiritual and engineering achievements? Paleoclimatologists like Harvey Weiss point to a major climatic shift known as the 8.2 kiloyear event, a period of rapid global cooling and drying that began around 6200 BC. This change would have placed immense strain on the region's resources, altering rainfall patterns and making it difficult to sustain the large, concentrated populations needed for both farming and monument construction. In the face of such environmental hardship, the social logic that bound the community may have fractured, forcing groups to migrate or revert to a more mobile, less complex way of life. Yet climate is only one piece of the puzzle. Another theory suggests that the very success of these early centers contained the seeds of their own obsolescence. The social organization and specialized labor perfected at Göbekli Tepe may have eventually led to the rise of powerful, centralized authorities in emerging agricultural towns. Power and population could have gradually shifted to these new urban hubs, leaving the older ritual centers on the hilltops spiritually and politically marginalized. The old way of communal gathering gave way to a new logic of centralized control, making the massive collective building projects seem unnecessary. We also see evidence of an ideological transformation. The intricate carvings of wild animals that dominate Göbekli Tepe's pillars gradually give way to different symbols in later periods, reflecting a shift in spiritual focus, perhaps toward domesticated plants and animals or different ancestral figures. The community may have simply outgrown its old beliefs, choosing to seal away the sacred home of their former gods as they embraced a new cosmological understanding. The careful placement of artifacts within the fill, such as intact stone vessels or carved plaques, suggests this burial was a final, respectful ceremony. What does this deliberate abandonment teach us about early societies? It reveals their incredible fragility. These pioneering experiments in complex social living were exquisitely sensitive to both environmental pressures and internal social evolution. The engineering logic that allowed them to build for eternity was ultimately subject to the changing currents of climate, culture, and belief. This mystery reminds us that innovation is not a linear path, but a story of adaptation, where even the most profound breakthroughs must sometimes be set aside. The deliberate burial of their greatest monuments was not an end, but a transformation. The engineering logic pioneered at places like Göbekli Tepe did not simply fade away. It was absorbed, adapted, and refined, traveling down through generations to form the bedrock of the ancient world's most iconic structures. We can trace a direct lineage of knowledge, a current of innovation flowing from the pre-pottery builders to the dense urban fabric of Çatalhöyük, with its shared walls and ritual platforms, and onward to the ziggurats of Mesopotamia and the pyramids of Egypt. Each successive civilization built upon these early experiments, inheriting a cognitive and social toolkit for turning collective vision into stone. At its core, this legacy is defined by three powerful continuities. The first is the principle of collective labor, the undeniable power of a unified community working toward a single, monumental goal. The second is the unbroken tradition of celestial alignment, weaving cosmic order into architecture. And the third is the use of symbolic form, where a building's shape and decoration convey a deep, shared meaning. These were not separate inventions, but interconnected parts of a single, revolutionary logic. Experts like Colin Renfrew propose that these early frameworks provided a blueprint for state formation itself. The ability to mobilize a population for a grand project became the ultimate expression of power and social unity, a tool later rulers would use to forge kingdoms and empires. We can see this technical inheritance in specific architectural forms. The trilithon, a structure of two massive upright stones supporting a horizontal lintel, appears in its most basic form at Göbekli Tepe and finds its ultimate expression thousands of years later at Stonehenge. This was not a coincidence, but evidence of a persistent engineering solution to the challenge of creating stable, monumental doorways and frames. Similarly, the concept of a ritual landscape, where architecture is integrated with natural features like hills, springs, and sightlines to the horizon, begins with these first hilltop sanctuaries and continues through the sacred complexes of later cultures. How did these early innovations pave the way for the classical world? They established the fundamental grammar of monumental construction. They proved that a society could coordinate on a generational scale, that geometry could bind earth to sky, and that stone could be made to speak a cultural language. The pyramids are not an alien anomaly. They are the magnificent culmination of a process that began when the first community decided to invest its surplus not just in survival, but in a symbol meant to outlast them all. Recognizing this continuity forces us to see these first engineers not as mysterious outliers, but as the foundational architects of civilization itself. Their work echoes through millennia, a silent testament to the human drive to build meaning into the world. A popular television documentary might suggest that the precise alignments at Göbekli Tepe are proof of extraterrestrial guidance. This compelling fiction, however, collapses under the weight of meticulous archaeological science. The true story is one of human ingenuity, a gradual process of discovery refined over centuries. Consider the T-shaped pillars, once labeled as mysterious or alien. We now understand them as highly stylized human forms, an artistic tradition deeply rooted in the local symbolic world of the pre-pottery Neolithic. Their abstract shape likely represented ancestors or powerful beings, a concept far more profound than any visitor from the stars. The argument that hunter-gatherers were too primitive for such projects ignores the very evidence these sites provide. These were not simple brutes, but sophisticated societies with a deep understanding of their environment, complex social structures, and a powerful drive to create meaning. Their intellect was different from ours, but it was no less formidable. The precision of the solar and stellar alignments is another point of contention. Skeptics like Jason Colavito rightly insist that extraordinary claims demand extraordinary evidence. In this case, the evidence points not to miraculous knowledge, but to patient, generational observation. Using simple sighting poles and markers on the horizon, these early astronomers could track the slow drift of sunrise points throughout the year, eventually pinpointing the solstices with remarkable accuracy. This was a practical science developed through repetition and recorded in stone for future generations. The scientific methods used to verify this human story are just as compelling. Carbon dating of organic materials found in the construction fill provides a reliable timeline, confirming the site's incredible age. Stratigraphy, the study of soil layers, shows a clear sequence of building and modification, revealing a history of use and reuse over hundreds of years. This is not the signature of a single, miraculous construction event, but of a living, evolving cultural center. Experimental archaeology puts the final nail in the coffin of these myths. When modern researchers, using only replicated Stone Age tools and techniques, successfully quarry, move, and erect a multi-ton pillar, they demonstrate that the impossible is entirely achievable with cooperation and persistence. So why do the myths of lost civilizations and ancient astronauts persist so stubbornly in our modern imagination? They often reveal more about us than about the past. They can represent a reluctance to grant our early ancestors their full intellectual due, or a desire for a past that is more fantastical than the complex human reality. Letting go of these fantasies is not a reduction of the past, but a celebration of it. The real magic lies not in imagined alien contact, but in the breathtaking fact that ordinary people, with simple tools and an extraordinary shared vision, achieved these wonders through their own logic and labor. The principles that guided these ancient builders are not relics of a distant past, but a living blueprint for our own future. The logic of Göbekli Tepe offers powerful lessons for confronting modern challenges like climate change and social fragmentation, starting with the fundamental idea of sustainability. These early engineers worked in harmony with their environment, not against it. They used local limestone, a durable and readily available material, ensuring their structures were resilient and required no complex supply chains or energy-intensive manufacturing. Their designs, anchored directly to the bedrock, were built for permanence with a minimal need for maintenance. This mirrors the cradle-to-cradle philosophy championed by modern thinkers like William McDonough, which envisions buildings that are fully integrated into natural cycles, just as those early monuments were designed to become a permanent part of the landscape. We can apply this same logic today by prioritizing local, durable materials and designing structures that work with local climates, reducing our reliance on artificial heating and cooling and creating architecture that is truly built to last. This ancient approach to resourcefulness reveals a profound truth about building for the long term. The true strength of their projects, however, lay not just in the stone, but in the social fabric that supported it. The immense effort at sites like Göbekli Tepe was fueled by social capital, the collective trust and shared purpose of an entire community. There were no top-down commands or financial incentives, only a unified belief in a common goal. This model holds a crucial lesson for contemporary urban planning. When communities are genuinely engaged and have a shared stake in a project, the results are often more innovative, more resilient, and more deeply cared for over time. This collaborative spirit can dramatically reduce the social and financial costs associated with large-scale developments, transforming them from imposed structures into embraced community assets. How do we translate that ancient sense of shared ownership into our modern, complex societies? The answer may lie in the very geometry they used. The intuitive, human-scaled proportions found in these ancient sites create spaces that feel inherently harmonious. They did not rely on complex algorithms, but on the natural geometry of the human body and the observable world. This principle can be directly applied today to combat the alienating feel of many modern urban environments. By designing public spaces, parks, and even housing with these intuitive proportions, we can create places that feel welcoming and human, fostering interaction and a sense of belonging. We can even look to their engineering for technical inspiration. The passive stability of dry stone walling, which uses gravity and clever shaping to create structures that flex and settle without collapsing, could inspire new low-energy construction methods that require no concrete or steel. How can we rediscover this ancient logic? It begins by looking at our own landscapes not as blank slates to be dominated, but as partners in creation. It means valuing collective input and long-term legacy over short-term profit, and recognizing that the most enduring structures are always those that are rooted in both their place and their people. The past is not a closed book, but an open manual for building a more resilient and connected world. A stable climate was the silent partner in every ancient construction project. The fertile plains and well-watered hills of the pre-Pottery Neolithic provided a generous surplus of wild grains, nuts, and game, creating a foundation of abundance that allowed labor to be diverted from mere survival to ambitious creation. This was a world in delicate balance, however, and even minor shifts in temperature or rainfall could reshape entire societies. The Younger Dryas period, a 1,000-year stretch of returning cold and dry conditions just before the rise of Göbekli Tepe, may have been the very crucible of innovation. As resources grew scarce and familiar hunting grounds changed, the old, scattered way of life became less reliable. In this time of mounting pressure, the logic of banding together became a matter of resilience. Building a shared monumental center was not just an act of faith, but a brilliant social strategy. It created a fixed point of unity and identity in an unstable world, a place where knowledge, resources, and labor could be pooled to ensure the community's survival. This perspective, championed by researchers like Joy McCorriston, reframes these great building projects as sophisticated adaptations to hardship. The monument was a community's anchor in a shifting environmental sea. This deep connection to the land dictated every aspect of a site's location and design. Builders consistently chose elevated positions with commanding views, not only for their symbolic prominence but for very practical reasons. A hilltop was easier to defend from rival groups who might also be feeling the strain of a changing climate. More importantly, these higher locations often sat above the valley fogs and floods, catching cooler breezes in the summer and offering some protection from pests. Proximity to a reliable water source like a spring or a perennial stream was absolutely non-negotiable. The entire workforce, which could number in the hundreds for a single project, required a constant supply of fresh water, not just for drinking but for the construction process itself, used to create slick mud paths for moving stones. The architecture itself became a tool for managing the local microclimate. The specific orientation of an enclosure, carefully aligned to the sun's path, was likely a dual-purpose innovation. A southeastern alignment would capture the low-angled warmth of the morning sun during chilly winters, while the massive stones themselves could be positioned to block the prevailing winds, creating a sheltered space for gatherings. This was a form of passive environmental engineering, using the mass and placement of stone to create a more comfortable and usable ritual space throughout the seasons. The ultimate response to a changing environment, however, may be the most dramatic of all. The careful, deliberate burial of Göbekli Tepe and other sites could be the final chapter in this story of adaptation. As the climate warmed and the region became progressively drier, the social and economic system that supported these massive ritual centers may have become unsustainable. The water sources diminished, the game moved on, and the people were forced to disperse or shift their focus entirely to intensive farming in more reliable areas. Burying the temple was not an act of defeat, but one of profound respect. It was a way to protect their greatest spiritual achievement from the elements and from neglect, sealing it as a time capsule for a future they could no longer inhabit. What does this ancient dialogue between climate and construction teach us about resilience? It reveals that the most enduring innovations are often born from constraint, and that true engineering logic has always required a deep, responsive partnership with the natural world. The tools of these first engineers were extensions of their own hands, each one a product of countless generations of observation and refinement. Without metal, they turned to the materials their landscape provided, mastering a sophisticated toolkit of stone, bone, and wood. A craftsperson might use a heavy, rounded hammerstone of durable river rock to pound a limestone block into its rough shape, then switch to a finer flint adze to shave and smooth its surface. For the most delicate work, like carving the intricate feathers on a bird of prey, they would employ a sharp beron, a stone tool with a chisel-like point, to incise clean, precise lines. Each tool was designed for a specific purpose, a testament to a deep, practical understanding of material properties and fracture mechanics. Lithic analysts like George Odell note that these were not general-purpose implements. The toolkit was highly specialized, with different hammers for crushing, pecking, and polishing, and antler picks perfectly shaped for digging the deep foundation sockets that anchored the pillars. This was an empirical science of stone, where the right tool used in the right way could transform a raw block into a precisely shaped monument. How did they create and maintain such a varied arsenal? The manufacturing process itself was a skilled craft. A core of high-quality flint or obsidian would be carefully struck with a softer hammer of bone or antler to detach long, sharp flakes. These flakes were then painstakingly pressure-flaked, pressed against a hard surface with a pointed tool to shape them into blades, scrapers, and barons. Maintaining an edge meant constant resharpening, a cycle of use and renewal that kept the tools effective. The social organization behind this production is equally revealing. The presence of specialized workshops at some sites suggests that certain individuals became dedicated artisans, their entire focus devoted to producing the finest chisels and barons for the community's grand project. The discovery of obsidian tools at Göbekli Tepe, made from volcanic glass traded from sources hundreds of kilometers away, reveals a stunning truth. The construction of these monuments was supported by vast, pre-existing trade networks. The community sought out the best materials available, ensuring their artisans had the sharpest blades to execute the most detailed symbolic carvings. This focus on technological innovation reflects a profound cognitive leap. It demonstrates foresight, planning, and the ability to systematize knowledge. The development of a specialized toolkit is a hallmark of complex thought, showing that these early engineers were not just reacting to their environment, but actively shaping it through designed instruments. The logic of their engineering was as much about the perfection of the tool as it was about the grandness of the vision, a partnership between the hand, the mind, and the stone that prepared the way for the breathtaking artistry etched into every surface. The carved vulture on a pillar is not merely an image, it is an essential part of the structure's strength. For these early builders, art and engineering were a single, indivisible discipline. The aesthetic choices were not decorative additions but fundamental components of the architectural logic, where spiritual symbolism and physical stability reinforced one another. A T-shaped pillar carved with a powerful bore does more than tell a story. Its very presence imbues the stone with a perceived spiritual weight, transforming the entire structure into a network of symbolic load-bearers. The technical skill required for this integration was immense, creating a deep relief on a limestone surface with only flint and bone tools demanded not just a steady hand but a profound foresight. The artist had to visualize the final form within the raw block, carefully pecking away the negative space to leave the animal emerging from the stone, a process that required an intimate understanding of the material's grain and fracture points. This was engineering through artistry. As scholar Ian Hodder suggests, this represents a domestication of the mind, a moment in human history where abstract thought became permanently embedded in the physical world. Practical objects were no longer just practical, they were now carriers of deep cultural meaning. This fusion guided the very experience of the sacred space. The strategic placement of a snarling predator at an entrance, for instance, was not random. It used the emotional power of art to define a clear boundary, marking the transition from the mundane world outside to the spiritually charged interior. The carvings directed movement, drawing the eye and the body along a predetermined path toward the central pillars, creating a narrative journey through the architecture itself. So why would a community, with survival still a constant concern, dedicate such immense effort to this visual language? The answer lies in a holistic understanding of what makes a monument endure. A structure that only stands is just a pile of rocks, but a structure that speaks, that resonates with meaning and belief, becomes a living part of the community's identity. Its beauty and its narrative depth compelled people to maintain it, to protect it, and to ensure its story was passed down. The art was not a luxury, it was the ultimate guarantor of the engineering's longevity, speaking directly to the human soul to ensure the stones would never be forgotten. A single blueprint for monumentality could have traveled along ancient trade routes, or the same idea might have sparked simultaneously in the minds of disconnected human societies. This is the central puzzle of cultural diffusion versus independent innovation, a debate that asks whether humanity's greatest leaps are born of connection or of a shared internal logic. On a map of the ancient Near East, diffusionists draw arrows radiating out from a point like Göbekli Tepe, tracing the pathways of people, goods, and ideas. They point to the compelling evidence of shared symbolic language, most strikingly the T-shaped pillar, a distinct architectural form found at sites separated by hundreds of kilometers. The argument, supported by archaeologists like James Millott, is that a Neolithic package of technologies, social structures, and spiritual concepts spread together, carried by migrating communities. In this view, a revolutionary idea was simply too powerful not to be shared, traveling along the same obsidian trade routes that brought precious volcanic glass from central Turkey to the Syrian plains. The very stone tools used for carving could have been the vessels for symbolic concepts, with the knowledge of how to build a temple arriving alongside the material to build it. Yet other scholars like Lewis Binford present a compelling counterargument. They see a world where similar challenges naturally yield similar solutions. If multiple societies were undergoing the same profound transitions from hunting and gathering to settled farming, they would have faced identical social pressures. They needed new ways to forge group identity, to mark territory, and to create focal points for their emerging worldviews. In this light, the impulse to build something monumental becomes a universal human response to a specific set of circumstances, not a borrowed fashion. The evidence for independent invention lies in the telling local variations. While the T-shape is a common thread, the specific animals carved upon them differ dramatically, reflecting local ecologies and mythologies. A site near a river might feature fish and water birds, while one in the foothills showcases ibex and leopards. Furthermore, the timelines do not always align perfectly for a simple spread. Some of the smaller, earlier sites could represent not the faded echoes of a great original, but local experiments, parallel prototypes emerging from a shared human cognitive toolkit. This debate forces us to consider the very nature of innovation. Is human creativity a flame passed from one torch to another, or is it a spark that can ignite independently wherever the conditions are right? The answer is likely a complex tapestry woven from both threads. Trade networks undoubtedly facilitated the exchange of knowledge, but the readiness to adopt and adapt that knowledge, and the drive to create it in the first place, speaks to something innate within us. This reveals a profound truth about our species. We are deeply connected beings, yet we are also endowed with a universal capacity to look at a pile of stone and envision a legacy. Our early ancestors were not just passive recipients of culture, they were active, ingenious participants in a global, if slow, conversation. Understanding this intricate dance between shared ideas and local genius invites a deeper look into the people who powered this revolution and the often overlooked roles they played. The fingerprints left on a stone tool can be as telling as the carvings on a pillar. For decades, the mental image of prehistoric monument builders was dominated by a single figure, a muscular man straining to lift a massive stone. This traditional narrative, however, is being carefully dismantled by the quiet evidence of archaeology itself. The construction of the world's first great structures was not a male-only endeavor, but a symphony of coordinated effort where every member of the community had a vital part to play. Picture a worksite alive with diverse activity. While some individuals, likely leveraging their physical strength, maneuvered the largest stones, others applied their own crucial expertise. Women might have been grinding vibrant ochre and other natural pigments for the symbolic paintings that adorned the walls, their knowledge of local plants and minerals essential to the ritual life of the structure. Children could have been tasked with carrying water in skin bags, a constant and critical supply needed for mixing binding materials and for the workers themselves. Elders, repositories of generational wisdom, might have sat nearby, their stories and songs not merely entertainment, but the very guides that ensured the symbolic layout and carvings adhered to sacred tradition. This inclusive picture is supported by skeletal studies and ethnographic parallels. Anthropologist Rosemary Joyce points out that in many pre-state societies, labor was organized by practical task and ability, not rigid gender lines. Everyone participated in communal projects that served the whole group. The division of roles was likely fluid and pragmatic. Women possessing deep, localized knowledge of seasonal cycles, plant life, and water sources may have been instrumental in the initial planning stages, choosing optimal locations and timing for construction. Their hands, evidenced by wear patterns on certain types of tools found at contemporary sites, were just as likely to have shaped pottery, woven the heavy ropes for transport, or crafted the fine berrins used for detailed carving. This rethinking is further underscored by the symbolic art from the period. The so-called Venus figurines, found across Europe and the Near East at sites contemporary with Göbekli Tepe, depict figures with exaggerated feminine features, suggesting that principles of fertility, life, and the feminine were deeply revered within these early belief systems. Some of the T-shaped pillars themselves have been interpreted as having an androgynous or abstract human form, potentially representing ancestors or deities beyond a simple male-female binary. How does this expanded view of the workforce reshape our understanding of the engineering logic? It reveals that the true innovation was not merely a feat of physics, but a triumph of social organization that leveraged the full spectrum of human talent. The monument's strength was drawn from the collective knowledge of the entire community, its design infused with a worldview that valued diverse contributions. This was not a project built by half a society, but by a whole people, each person's labor a stitch in the fabric of a legacy meant to include them all. Our own cities and communities are the modern equivalents of those ancient stone circles. Every bridge we engineer, every public park we cultivate, and every digital network we weave is a testament to the same enduring human drive. We are still building monuments not just from steel and glass, but from code and social connection, each project a reflection of our collective values and our vision for the future. What will an archaeologist 10,000 years from now deduce about us from the fragments we leave behind? They might uncover the foundations of a vast data center and interpret it as a temple to a forgotten god of information. They might study the layout of a sprawling suburb and see a society that valued individual space over communal gathering. The legacy we are building right now is being written in the choices we make about what to construct and, more importantly, why. The ancient logic of Göbekli Tepe challenges us to infuse our own creations with the same purposeful integration. Are we designing neighborhoods that foster social bonds or ones that contribute to isolation? Are we constructing buildings that harmonize with their environment or that fight against it with massive energy consumption? We have the same capacity for foresight and collaboration as those early builders, yet we often allow our projects to be driven by short-term gains rather than long-term meaning. The true parallel lies in the power of shared purpose. Just as a unified vision enabled hunter-gatherers to move 10-ton pillars, a clear, collective goal can empower modern communities to tackle immense challenges like climate adaptation or urban renewal. When people feel a genuine stake in an outcome, the labor transforms from a chore into a contribution, much like the sacred work on that Turkish hilltop. This ancient model invites us to weave sustainability and artistry back into the fabric of our functional world. A rainwater harvesting system can be a beautiful sculptural element in a public square. A community garden can be both a source of fresh food and a place for shared stories. By consciously choosing to build with an eye toward legacy, we reconnect with that most human of impulses to create something that matters beyond our own brief lives. Our enduring monuments may not be carved from limestone, but from the positive impact we have on our world and the connections we nurture between people. This timeless drive to build meaningfully is our shared inheritance, a quiet call to consider not just what we can build, but what is truly worth building for the generations to come. The stones of Göbekli Tepe stand as a final, silent argument against the myth of the primitive. Our journey reveals that the world's first monumental architecture was born from a profound and integrated logic, a seamless fusion of collective will, environmental intelligence, and symbolic purpose. We have traced the path from a revolutionary discovery that overturned our timeline of civilization to the core principles that made it possible: the power of unified labor, the intuitive grasp of geometry, and the alignment with cosmic cycles. These builders show us that true, enduring innovation is never the product of a lone genius. It is a social phenomenon born from shared vision and fortified by generations of perseverance. Their legacy is not just in the stones they left behind, but in the cognitive and social frameworks they built, patterns that would shape every great civilization to follow. These ancient lessons resonate powerfully today in a world that often prizes individual achievement over collective purpose. They invite us to look at the structures that define our own lives, from the cities we inhabit to the digital networks we navigate, and to see them as the modern equivalents of those first stone circles, each one embodying a choice about what we value and what we wish to leave behind. The greatest wonder these monuments offer is the reminder of our own capacity to build meaning together. What part of their story resonated most deeply with you? Share your reflections below. If uncovering these hidden chapters of human brilliance inspires you, subscribe for more journeys into the mysteries of our past. Thank you for exploring this rediscovery, and may it inspire your own acts of creation.